Hi, and welcome to SheQuest Podcast, a radio show that will help you not only claim your awareness around the concept of power, body, beauty, voice, and the arts of your life, but truly embody it. I'm your host, Estelle Thompson. You are here to widen your lens on the unfiltered and uncurated conversation we have in my SheQuest membership program. And best yet, you'll get real life, tangible tools to stay real and true to you. Each season, we will interview incredible, knowledgeable guests, and you'll educate and uplift as we strive to live whole and not perfect. Welcome. Hi, SheQuest. Welcome to an episode with guest. I'm your host, Estelle Thompson. This fall, I wanted us to take a deeper look at the importance of our moons and our dreams. What does that look like for you? Moons and dreams have long been related to feminine magic. How does the moon cycle and season in our life relates to our dreams and our desires? Here's to diving into a new episode for self-discovery and radical transformation. So this isn't the first time at SheQuest that we talk about menstrual cycle awareness. But it's really the first time that we look specifically at menopause and perimenopause. So for this, I'm so thrilled to have reached out to Jenn Salib Huber, who's a Canadian Registered Dietitian, naturopathic doctor. And after completing her degree in nutrition from Acadia University, became a registered dietitian. And she went on to study naturopathic medicine in Toronto. In practice for more than 16 years, she helps women navigate the physical and emotional changes that happen in perimenopause and menopause, including the search for food freedom and body confidence. I can't wait to talk about that. Working from a health at every size approach, she teaches women to become intuitive eaters and build body confidence in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. Well-versed in the integrative treatment option available to women in midlife, she helped women come up with treatment strategy that meets their unique needs for a better menopause. She strongly believes that women need to come together to normalize this experience and offers small online group programs to help women feel their best. Her online program, The Thinking Woman's Guide to Perimenopause, is a 4-week program to open women to any stage of peri and menopause who are looking to regain confidence in their bodies and themselves. Hi, Jenn.
Hi,
Thank you so much for your time and coming on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. So my first question always is, what makes you feel alive today?
Adventure. In the big sense, I think that adventure as an adult is that opportunity for surprise. And the element of surprise is missing. And I know it was missing in my life for a long time because life just got really routine and predictable. And for me, joy is an adventure. So now that I'm on this little bit of an overseas adventure for the next couple of years, I'm trying to find the adventure in every day.
I love that so much. It's so in line with SheQuest and that word, like being on a quest and adventure. I love that so much. And perhaps you can tell us, I know I said your bio kind of in terms of education, but can you tell us here, we call it our she stories, our ever evolving she stories. So how did you end up being overseas? Tell us all about that.
Well, I don't know how far to go back.
Go back. What, you grew up in Nova Scotia?
No, I didn't. So we'll go back a little further than that.
Okay.
So I was born in Nova Scotia, but moved to New Brunswick before I was a year old, and spent most of my life there. And then came back to Nova Scotia to go to university. Met my partner, did the whole long distance relationship, came back to Nova Scotia, got married, started working, settled down, and kind of felt, like that was kind of the end of, or not the end, but that I had kind of arrived right into adulthood. I had checked off all those boxes, and life was really good. And then a couple of years ago, I had a pretty big shakeup in my world, in that I found out through a DNA test that I was donor conceived. So my biological father wasn't my biological father, still very much my dad, no question about that. But that I genetically wasn't who I thought I was. So at 41, that was a really big shakeup, and it came with a lot of lovely surprises, in that I now have this huge bonus family of 9 half siblings, 23 nieces and nephews. The donor family himself and his extended family are now kind of part of our bonus family. So my world got really big and really small at the same time. So that was kind of most of 2018. And then in 2019, very unexpectedly, my husband was offered the opportunity to work overseas for a few years. And in a beautiful universal coincidence, allowed us to live in the same city as one of my half sisters, which happened to be in The Hague in the Netherlands. So it seemed very meant to be that we needed to say yes to this adventure. And so I was able to pass the reins of my clinic in Dartmouth to the chiropractor that I had worked with, one of my really good friends, so that project was able to continue to be the wonderful, caring space that it is, just not under my guidance anymore. And we were able to pick up our family and move halfway around the world and start this new adventure.
Whoa. I'm just kind of floored how, like you said, something that kind of marked me. Like, so you were 41 when all this kind of blew up.
Yeah.
It must have felt maybe a bit like an identity crisis, or?
Oh, it 1,000% was an identity crisis.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that I was half Egyptian. The dad that raised me, who passed away many years ago, more than a decade ago. But, I was under the impression that I was half Egyptian my whole life. And come to find out I'm like 90% Scottish. So,
Wow.
yeah. But it's been amazing because, through getting to know this extended family of absolutely beautiful souls, I have learned so much about myself, because I've been able to identify parts of myself in other people, which isn't something that I ever had. Being an only child, coming from a small family where most of my dad's family was overseas, so I never really got the chance to know them anyway. This was more than an identity crisis. It was like an identity earthquake.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an initiation. Wow. And then now you're in the Netherlands. Do you work as a naturopath there?
I'm doing a little bit of everything right now. So this is kind of a temporary move for our family. So the plan is that in the next few years, we will certainly return to Nova Scotia. So, I really wanted to still be able to work with the people that I had been working with and helping for the last 16 years. And so most of the work that I'm doing now is online, still primarily with Canadians. So any kind of one-on-one work I'm still doing with mainly people who are living in the Maritimes. But as part of trying to serve a larger community and, realizing that there are people all around the world going through this experience, I've also developed the Thinking Woman's Guide to Menopause, which is the 4-week program.
Amazing. And I want us to dive deep into that. And I want you to talk more about your program just later on in the show, because first, I just want to go back to the basic with this episode, I feel. And I feel we have obviously an understanding of what menopause is, but can you give us just a running kind of definition? What is it? And I mean, I know it's complex, but can you break it down for us? And then what does a menopause nutritionist do?
Kind of medically speaking, we can divide the phases into chunks of time. So premenopause is kind of everything through your childbearing years. Perimenopause is the period of time which can be up to 10 years before menopause. And menopause is actually one day. Menopause is the day that marks 12 months since your last period, and everything after that is postmenopause. So the terms are often used kind of interchangeably, but I would
Yeah.
say that most of the time when women say that they're in menopause, they're actually in perimenopause, because it's often still that period of time when they're still having periods, but they're having a whole host of symptoms that they didn't have when they were premenopausal, if that makes sense.
Oh my God, my mind is blown right now, Jen. Wait, like menopause is like one day? What?
Yeah. So, that's the strictly medical,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
definition of it. When I work with women in perimenopause, I'm often talking about this as being a season in their lives, right?
Yeah.
So, we have our teenage season, we have our 20s and our childbearing season. And, this kind of perimenopause is another season, right? So it comes with changes that are sometimes physical, sometimes mental, sometimes emotional. We can have sunny days, we can have hurricanes, like there's so much going on. But a big part of what I do in my work is acknowledging and addressing the emotional side of menopause as much as the physical. Because one of the things that we've learned through research is that women who feel informed and empowered about the experience have a much better kind of positive outlook about it, both during and after. So that's one of the big things that I focus on, is how can we empower women so that this is a positive experience instead of the negative one that culture has really imposed on us.
It really has. Not just like negative, but like almost like shame. Well, not just almost, like a
Yeah.
lot of, and just like the hiding thing. I mean, in periods, with having periods, like in general, this like need to hide and stuff. I'm just so over it. I'm so over it.
The language that's used, right? We talk about ovaries shriveling up. We don't talk about, the beautiful transitions that can come from not being, bathed in estrogen all the time, right? So, estrogen is our nurturing hormone. So this is the hormone that, as my friend Sarah, who's also a naturopath, defines it as the hormone that helps us not to eat our babies, right? So,
I love it.
right. So, full credit to Sarah Bailey. For anyone who knows her in Halifax, that's definitely her tagline. But, it is the hormone that helps us to nurture. It is, and it doesn't matter whether that's a baby or a job or a project or a cookbook, whatever it is, you have a strong desire to support, nurture, and grow and see this project to kind of completion. When that changes, so when you're no longer in that estrogen based soup, you feel like who you are is changing, right? So
Mhm.
women will say, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm angry, I'm irritable, I can't sleep, I have all this stuff going on. And when we really break it down, it's not so much that they're, not sleeping, it's that the not sleeping is making them feel like they don't have the control that they used to have over their lives, or
Mm.
that they're no longer in a place to feel like they're confident in their decision making skills, or like there's so many, kind of outcomes that come from the symptoms that we're not talking about. We're only talking about the symptoms. So when we start talking about how these things are affecting women, we really start to get to the root of why menopause is so turbulent.
You speak so beautifully. And one thing that has come up over well, two things that coming in my mind right now, but the first one from the community, Chic West, is like how nobody tells you you're going to grieve your period.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you're going to grieve, that cycles and expecting it. And like, do you want to speak to this a little?
Yeah, I think that again, like the seasons, right? So
Yeah.
for 20 plus years of your life, when you're in your reproductive prime, you have a predictable season, right? Summer, spring, winter, fall. And then all of a sudden, you're in the Sahara Desert for 9 months of the year. or all of a sudden you find yourself in the Arctic and you just don't know your landscape. You look around, you don't recognize the plants, you don't know, what's going on, you don't know the people, you don't know where your way around. And so everything just sometimes feels really hard. So for women, I think a lot of what they're grieving with the loss of that regular cycle is the loss of familiarity that has come from having those predictable regular cycles. That part, the emotional experience of menopause, is probably the least talked about. And when I have conversations with women, it's probably the most important conversation we have.
Yes, I agree. I agree so much. Oh, I have so many questions for you, Jen. So many. And also, I asked the SheQuest community, for those that are listening, to answer some questions with Jen. Really, we're so grateful she's accepted to answer those. So really stay tuned for those. Are going to be later on the show. And I love all the metaphors you take. And I guess, having done this podcast for a year now, we always make the connection between, correct me if I'm wrong, like you're kind of on a mission, with, talking awareness with perimenopause and menopause. And so is there a link with your own story with that? Like, is that how it's influenced your life? Or
my longer story is that I have hated my period for most of my life. I was one of those people that from day one, periods were never comfortable. I was diagnosed with endometriosis when I was 17. I've had half a dozen surgeries for that. I've had 2 complicated births and C-sections. And so my uterus was just never something that I connected to on a grateful level, other than giving me my children. It was something that it was like, oh, I can't wait for menopause. And one of my family's gifts to me has been early menopause. So my mom and my grandmother and many of the women in my family go into menopause early. And so at 43, I'm actually almost there. Like I'm at the stage now where probably in the next year or 2, I won't be having periods anymore. And so I kind of leapt into this journey at 36, which is definitely on the younger side. But what it really did is it allowed me to kind of get there a little bit before my peers. And so at 43, feel like I have so much experience personally that I can add to my professional experience to really help women on their journey.
I love that. And I'm just fascinating about how like our stories, like our karma becomes our dharma, like I love that. And that's why I love kind of making that connection, because everybody that comes on the podcast is on like a bigger mission than themselves, and it's from something that's happened to them. Like the fact that you hated your period, now you help women like have smooth transitions. Like how amazing is that? And you didn't ask to have like, awful periods all your life and complicated births and all that. And then look what's, you made flowers out of like something really sucky,
Yeah. And, it's funny because now that I'm, having periods very infrequently and with absolutely no regularity, I am cherishing the ones that I do have now. It's kind of like it's kind of like, when you have a baby that's becoming a toddler and then a kid, and you're in those kind of in between stages where you start to recognize like, this might be the last time, right? This might be the last time they climb into my lap, or this might be the last time they hold my hand. I have that kind of relationship now with my period where I'm like, okay, you're still a lot of work, but I'm glad that you're here for another time. And this might be the end. Who knows?
I love it. So tell us, like, how can we, and I know it's like a really broad question, and I assume that it's, very personal to every woman. And you mentioned having the condition, what's it called?
Endometriosis.
Yes, sorry. And so I know that differs a lot, but in general, how can we have smoother, like for me, for example, I'm about to be 39. So I know I'm kind of entering that early kind of like probably in 10 years, I'll be, I'll have my menopause. Like how can we have a smooth transition, and you can talk about food, because I know that's really your area as well.
Yeah. So it's a huge answer. If I'm starting from the top, I think that going into perimenopause with the mindset that change happens, and the cultural narrative has been to fight aging tooth and nail. right? So, you have to keep trying to lose weight and use wrinkle cream and, do all these things that are, kind of trying to deny that aging is happening. And menopause causes women to kind of deviate from their ideological bodily norms, right? Both in appearance and function. And our culture hasn't been very accepting of that. So I think that a lot of what we need to do as women, as 50% of the population, is helping to change that narrative and starting with our own thoughts about aging. So recognizing that this is something we all go through. There isn't a woman on earth who escapes this, right? But just like seasons vary from in different parts of the world, some women, are definitely more symptomatic than others. But when it comes to how do we set ourselves up for success for a better menopause, it's very much based on a foundation of self-care that's rooted in self-compassion. So using food as an example, so many women go into menopause feeling like they're on shaky ground with their relationship with food. They're still maybe very much in diet culture, very much feeling like they have to continue to try and lose weight or prevent weight gain, or be constantly working to try and change how their body looks. And that's not rooted in self-care. And a lot of the behaviors around diet culture are the absolute opposite of self-compassion. So recognizing that change happens, that sometimes it's not always a bad thing. Looking at women's bodies changing, women, almost all women, 80% gain a bit of weight in perimenopause. And that probably means it's normal. And so if you're trying to support that change with, self-care and self-compassion, it's recognizing that this happens to everyone, that it's not your fault. It's nothing that you did. It's, what your hormones are trying to do to maybe beef up your estrogen a little bit, because fat produces estrogen. That helps to protect your heart and your bones and your brain. And using that paradigm to break the association that, you need to lose weight to be healthy is another part of that foundation. So when I work with women, and I think all women experience body changes that are unfamiliar, can be a little scary, maybe are completely unwelcome. But if we're only using weight as a barometer for success, if we're only looking at the number on the scale to gauge whether our efforts have been worth it, that's probably not going to work, right? So when I work with women to say, okay, how can we set you up for success? Let's figure out what food helps you to feel good, mentally, physically, and emotionally. Food should be pleasurable. You should be able to enjoy what you're eating. You shouldn't have to base all of your food decisions based on calories. You want to move your body in ways that feel good, right? So, and not just ways that burn calories, right? So often women really benefit from those nurturing practices like yoga, but maybe feel like it's not enough of a workout. So they're choosing something that they don't enjoy as much because it helps them to sweat more, but at the end of the day doesn't support their journey to a better menopause, if that makes sense.
That makes so much sense. And it's such an important conversation. I find that we're not having we're not having that conversation, and we're just kind of stuck with our own kind of inner dialogue. And I wanted to ask you, is there like hands-on way, like you, from what you were saying, like it feels there's a big focus on like aging, our own relationship with aging and our own relationship with like our weight. Two subjects I find are just loaded for us, as women. And I'm wondering if like with your patients, because at SheQuest I love to get really hands-on with that kind of really internal dialogue, or I don't want to call it inner critic, but like, when we deal with soul, it's so abstract and so metaphor. Like, is there hands-on ways, like whether it be like right now, I literally, as you were speaking, I wrote a note journal about aging. Like I've never journaled about aging, actually I've written about like my hair because I have quite dark hair. So like I've had, white coming out for like 5-6 years now. So I have written about that, but, do you know where I'm going with this? Like, is there hands-on ways we can just start to look at our own shit when it comes to Like, and I know that too is kind of like personal and stuff, but is there something you really recommend?
So 50% of women are surprised when perimenopause happens,
Mm,
which is a statistic that is crazy, right? So
great.
I use the analogy of pregnancy. So can you imagine if 50% of women were surprised by a pregnancy? We'd say that we would say that our sex education is failing miserably, right? But because we prepare, women and men for, their reproductive lives, and we have prenatal education, and we teach, sex ed and menstrual cycles in school and all that kind of stuff, most people aren't surprised. Some aren't, but most people aren't surprised when they're pregnant.
Celebrate your innate talents and radiance with gifts for the creative soul. By me, your muse fairy, Estelle. Visually magic paper products that are proudly painted in coastal Cow Bay, Nova Scotia, and printed locally here in Halifax. This year, I made my third large wall calendar. It is published independently. Each month is bursting with flowers and butterflies to add a spark of magic to your life. And guess what? The Chic West Planner is back in full force, helping you plan, journal, exercise your creativity. This book is filled with your favorite sheet art and words. I swear, this planner is everything to help you live aware, bold, and whole. Both the Magic Garden Calendar and the Chic West Planner are seasonal products. And once they are gone, they are gone. Order today at www.estellethompson.com/paper/shop or simply copy paste the link from your show notes. Happy holidays.
The biggest thing that women can do is to just immerse themselves in understanding what menopause is. Because unfortunately, their healthcare providers may not really be on the up and up. I had this conversation with someone today that a lot of healthcare providers are still working from the mindset that you don't need to treat anything until a woman's 50, right? That she can't be in menopause until she's 50. But that's crazy. The average age of menopause is 52, but that doesn't mean that, things can't be addressed before that. So immersing yourself in information and finding your tribe. We need to be like the orcas and the elephants that, have who put the elder women at the head of their tribe as the wise ones, the leaders, that, have gone before them and, been there and done that. We need to have, this community of crones, who can really just kind of hold our hands through this. And so that it isn't as scary, that it doesn't seem as, discombobulating, that we're not constantly feeling like we're making our way in the dark. So the hands-on approach is to just start immersing yourself in everything that you can read and everything that you can do to become informed about what's happening. And, not only research, but my experience says that it's a game changer in how women experience the transition.
I have this beautiful vision as you were talking of the orcas and the elephants. I love it. I got like full body shivers hearing you say this. It's really a beautiful vision. And I think the more of us, has this awareness and this vision, it's really going to happen. Like, I really believe that.
One of my favorite, it's not a saying, I guess, but, kind of philosophies around menopause and women is that when our reproduction stops, women are free to lead, because we're no longer immersed in that estrogen that is really kind of urging us to give our energy outwards, right? To nurture, to grow. We're able to turn that in. We're able to become creative again. We're able to really devote our energy to ourselves. And so when our reproduction stops, it's an end of reproduction, but it's the beginning of being free to lead.
I can't wait. Well, it's funny. I'm going to share something now because like when I decided, I don't know if you know my story, but I lost my son. He was 2.5 years old. Yeah. And then shortly after I got pregnant again, and I had a late miscarriage at 15 weeks.
Oh.
I was in a really obviously painful week. And then I just woke up one day and I was like, that's like, I don't want any more kids. Like, I want to give all that love I was able to give to
Mm.
my womb and to my, I was like, no, I think it's time. I feel really emotional talking about it, but I want to give it back to me now, that love. And I think it's really at this point that I was like, it was such a deep freedom that came over me because I decided I wasn't going to have any more kids. Do you know what I mean? I was like,
Yeah.
it was like such a relief. And it's funny because sometimes like when I'm ovulating, I get this like instinct, like, oh, maybe I want another baby. And then I remember that moment, that freedom that I felt. I'm like, oh no, I'm good. Like, I'm good. And it feels, that essence really feels like the menopause essence, where it's like, I'm free now, to nurture kind of myself.
It's amazing, and I think that that's an amazing story that lots of women can relate to, because that ovulatory urge to reproduce can be really strong, right?
Yes.
And can sometimes overwhelm our thinking brains, right? So, I think that when you can come to that decision and be really at peace with it, despite still having regular cycles, I think that's something to celebrate.
Yes, absolutely. So anyways, thank you for listening to that, because I felt really, it's beautiful, free to lead. Wow. I think that's going to be the title of our podcast, Jen.
Oh.
Amazing, amazing. So I want to go into questions
Yeah.
that the audience had, and this is a bit of a new feature I'm adding to just get more, like, I'm having, incredible guests just like you come and to, what the community wants to hear. And the questions I thought were just really like fucking good. So we're going to go. And the first one, I was like, oh my God, this is such a fun. And also some things that I didn't, think about asking you. So I'm really glad I did. So are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So the first question is, does menopause affect women differently who had children, or with, like, is it different if you've had children or not? Is it better if you've had children, or is it worse? Like, what's the rule here?
I
General
don't think
rule.
there is a rule there. I think that the experiences can be different, even for women, depending on when they had their kids, right? So if you have kids in your 20s, by the time that you go into perimenopause, they've already left the house, right? So chances are your experience would be like someone who didn't have children. Whereas if you had children later in life and you're going through perimenopause and changing diapers at the same time, you're going to have a really different experience than someone who had, kids when they were 29. So I don't know that they're different, but I think that the presence of children, whether or not you have children, definitely pulls you in many directions as you're going through this change in your hormonal soup, for sure.
So I guess makes me think of like the culture aspect, or like, again, like things, the environment can like
Yeah.
differ from the experience of menopause that you have. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the environment, stress is a huge one.
Yeah.
I've devoted an entire module to it in my program because it has
Wow.
effects, reaching far beyond just menopause. But yeah, I think that could be a show in and of itself. But it's definitely, it's influenced by many factors. The presence of children, more so than whether you have them or not, I think is probably the bigger factor.
Another question we had is, how does birth control affect menopause? And should we be taking it, should we be taking birth control coming into perimenopause and menopause?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question to answer because the pill creates a hormonal environment where you don't ovulate, right? That's the whole point of it. And when you don't ovulate, you're not producing your own progesterone, and your own estrogen levels are being suppressed by the estrogen levels that are in the pill. So it's hard to compare apples to apples because the environments are completely different. A lot of women do go into perimenopause still on the pill from maybe having taken it, kind of in their earlier life. And it can be sometimes difficult for us to know if their symptoms are related to perimenopause or not, because the pill is masking those. So one of the big things that we use to help determine where women are in their perimenopause journey is their cycles, right? Because we don't really have a test for perimenopause. There's no blood test. There's no real way to say yes or no other than looking at your cycles. And so if you're not having, your own cycles, you're having, the withdrawal bleeds that come from the pill, it can be really hard to determine A, whether you're in perimenopause, and B, what symptoms might be related to it. So I do often suggest that women consider coming off the pill, even for just a period of 3 to 6 months, to help figure that out. And many of them find that they feel better off of it. But, that's a very personal decision, obviously.
Yeah. And I find like just stories like just coming from a traditional medical system, how a lot of times the pill is given when you have menstrual problem. Am I correct when I say that? Yeah.
And it's not so much that it solves them, it just creates a different cycle. Right.
Right.
So, it suppresses ovulation so that you're not having a real period, which is, built from the lining building up and shedding from the hormonal change. It's what's called a withdrawal bleed. So you stop the hormones, you bleed for a few days, and then you start them over again. It can certainly, I think, change the experience of the symptoms, but it doesn't get to the root of why it's happening.
So another question was, do antidepressant have an effect on menopause symptoms? And the person who said this, she has a sleep disorder. Yep. So does that, she just wants to know if it aggravates or improves symptoms if she's on antidepressant or...
Yeah, well, antidepressants, interestingly, have been used a lot in the last 10 to 15 years for some symptoms of perimenopause, especially hot flashes. There was a big, big study that came out about 15 years ago called the Women's Health Initiative that found that there was concerns around breast cancer risk and hormone replacement therapy. So there was a big push to find alternatives to that. And one of them was antidepressants. So many, many, many women have been prescribed antidepressants with mixed results. I don't think that it hurts anything. So if she's at all concerned that maybe taking this is having a negative effect on her perimenopause, I don't think that's the case. But some women who are prescribed it for hot flashes or night sweats have mixed results. And the literature kind of supports that too, that it's okay for some women, but it's not necessarily the most effective treatment.
And then another question was about magnesium. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us of the role of magnesium, like research around it, or is it something like very common to start taking magnesium once
magnesium is one of my favorite minerals of all time. So,
tell us why.
So it's a mineral that we get from food that is grown in soil, and we definitely need quite a bit of it. And we're not getting as much as probably we would like, mainly because we're not eating as many things that are grown from the soil. And some of the things that are being grown in soil, the soil is deficient. So, we're not rotating our crops, we're, overusing the land, that kind of stuff. So some estimates are that people are, generally deficient. But it's difficult to tell because blood magnesium, like measuring your blood levels for magnesium, really only tells us how much is available to your heart, and your heart needs it the most. So you always want to make sure that you have enough for your heart. But we don't know how much we can store. So it's difficult to know if someone's getting enough or not. But based on the fact that, food diaries and some of that, qualitative research tells us that probably not, I often will recommend magnesium, and there are 3 different types, main types. So the first is magnesium oxide, which is cheap and easy. You can pick it up anywhere. It can work for some people, but its most common side effect is that it can cause diarrhea. So it's an osmotic laxative. So for many people, magnesium oxide. Magnesium citrate is the next one, which is probably the most common, acts less like a laxative and has some pretty decent absorption. And then the last one is magnesium glycinate, which is the one that I would often use most often because it helps the most with sleep and relaxation.
Ooh, I think I need that one. Where can you get that one in like any Whole Food store?
Most health food stores would carry most of those. It's always probably a good idea to talk to someone before starting something. So either a naturopathic doctor,
Yeah.
pharmacist doctor, somebody who has some knowledge around what maybe some of the side effects might be for you or any drug interactions, that kind of thing.
Okay, wow. And thank you for all of this. And before we switch gears a little bit, can you talk to us about this wonderful program that you've created that sounds just really incredible and full of knowledge? And just tell us about it.
Yeah, so I created it's called the Thinking Woman's Guide to Menopause, and it's very much rooted in an idea of I want women to understand what's happening. Not menopause isn't a disease. It doesn't need to be treated, but I always use the analogy that we can take the bumpy road or we can take the paved road. We're going to get to Rome either way, but how you get there is up to you. And when women understand when something's happening, so when they understand why they get hot flashes for 3 days before their period, or when they understand why their ability to cope with stress feels compromised, they're in a much better place to understand it, and they're in a much better place to be able to handle it, right? So, and to be able to make the choice, right? To say, is this something that I feel like I need to treat at this point in my life right now, or is this something that I'm just going to ride out? So much of it is based on helping women to understand what stage they're in, also helping them to understand what treatment options are available to them, both integrative and conventional, because there's always a place for both. So, helping people to understand what the different treatment options are, again, so that they can feel empowered when they're starting to go through these symptoms. But all of the parts of the program are rooted in intuitive eating. So intuitive eating is my passion, and helping people to develop a relationship with food that nurtures them physically and mentally and emotionally. So helping them to try on food changes that aren't rule-based, right? So that they don't feel like they get a pass-fail. So that they can really try something on and evaluate it as, is this something that's good for me? Is this something that's working for me? And all of that coming together with a small group of women, 10 to 12 people per group, so that we can just share our experiences, because sharing them normalizes it. And when you realize that most women go through some of what you're going through, you feel less alone, you feel more empowered, and you feel hopeful. So that's kind of been my little passion project, especially since moving, and I love every group. It has just been a unique mix of women, and just a really, really great experience for everyone.
Well, we feel your passion as you speak, and also I might have to have you back on the podcast to talk about intuitive eating,
I would
because that's
love that.
another subject not often spoken about. I love to know. I'm kind of obsessed with knowing, and it's actually really inspiring to me. I want to know, if just switching gears a little bit, but your own kind of favorite personal tools for self-growth. Like, do you have daily soul rituals, things you do to ground yourself and just center in and be?
I'm a type A personality, and that's something I have recognized in myself for a long time. So I'm full of yang, and as I go through menopause and become more yin deficient, I definitely have to work at grounding myself more. And for me, grounding myself is moving my body. So any way that I can move my body gets me out of my head, right? So finding ways to move my body every day in ways that are joyful is probably my most reliable soul ritual. And then the next is creating with food. So cooking, when I need to nourish my creative spirit, I cook. When I need to get out of my head for a little bit and focus on, something other than, what my brain wants me to do, creating something, especially a soup. Soups are like my favorite thing to cook. I don't know if it's what it is, but just putting it all together and seeing what turns out. Those are probably my two most reliable rituals, are cooking and joyful movement.
Well, we are pretty kindred soul sisters in that manner, because actually this is something I do. Making soup has been so healing for me. Like, I love the ritual, cutting the vegetables,
Yeah.
and the onions and the garlic and the roots vegetables. And I usually this is a ritual after I travel. Not that I've done that any time recently, but when I come back from traveling, I've been on so many planes. Like that's the thing. Even before like doing a yoga practice, because I'm still so like kind of like in the like airport vibes and stuff. I go and I make a freaking soup and I eat it, and it's like the best grounding thing you could ever do.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and I think there's something with roots vegetables too that like feels really grounding. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so the last questions, Jen, are just kind of fun, kind of quick answers. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Do you have a favorite mantra?
Recently, my favorite mantra, and I use it with the kids too, is that we can do hard things. So just because something is hard doesn't mean we don't do it. So I have to remind myself of that as an adult, and that's something I'm trying to pass on to the kids too, that we can do hard things.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3.
Wow.
Yeah.
What age are they?
My oldest just turned 13, and my youngest 2 are twins, and they're 10 and a half.
Wow. And how are they finding, this is like completely off dialogue here, but how are they finding living abroad, like overseas?
Good. I mean, we arrived in November and then COVID hit in March. So we were really just getting settled when we kind of had to hunker down and isolate. So it's been weird, but at the same time, I think we've tried to make the most of it, in that the whole country is new to us, right? So, we still have things, that are within 10 kilometers of our house that we haven't explored. So being able to do that on a bike is really fun because everybody bikes here, and but they've been doing really well.
So cool. All right. I was just curious because like I feel a lot of families want to venture that, kind of try that, like just move somewhere else for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious about that. What about a favorite book that you've read about menopause that you recommend us?
It's probably the one that I'm reading right now. I really, really enjoy. It's called The Slow Moon Climbs by Susan Mattern, and it's about a little bit more about like the sociology and the science of menopause through different cultures. So it's pretty fascinating. But I also read a really funny one lately called Flash Count Diary. And I don't know, back when I was pregnant with my oldest, I think it was Jenny McCarthy who'd written a book called Belly Laughs or something. And it was like a really quick read. And it was just about all the funny things that happen when you're pregnant. Flash Count Diary is along that line too. So those are probably 2 recent ones.
Cool. And we'll have to put them in the show notes. And actually, this makes me think of a question I wanted to ask you about one that I get all the time because I do yoga classes with the inner seasons of the cycle. Like that's been really a game changer for me, where I've really adjusted my yoga practice to my monthly cycles. But then my ladies, that are in perimenopause or don't have have irregular cycles or are in menopause, they always ask me, okay, well, how do I sync that? And I always tell them to go inner spring would be the new moon, and then winter would be full moon. Am I correct? Is that like, I feel I read that in many literature, but can you maybe just talk about this for like a minute?
Yeah. And I think that, I've read that many, many times too. And I've also, obviously the moon has an effect on us. And I think that, when you read about people who spend more time outside, their cycles are synced that way a little bit more. So it seems reasonable to use that, I think, as a guide. But I don't know that I have a whole lot of experience around that.
I have so many more questions, but I'm just gonna have to shut it for a little. What about a favorite podcast?
My current favorite podcast is I Weigh, Jamil's podcast. She is a fabulous interviewer, and I love her podcast.
Cool. We'll have to put that one in the show notes too. I've never heard of it. And are you a books person or like Kindle?
Well, both, but now that we're kind of nomadic a little bit, I definitely love my e-reader because I can have like 10 books on the go and it just fits in my purse.
And what about like a favorite treat? Do you have any treat? It can be
anything salted caramel.
Amazing. And I have one last question, and it's a loaded question, but I love to kind of finish on a high note. And it's, what do you wish for this new world? Like, I really feel especially since the pandemic and having to like slow down, like we made way, like a clearing for like a new kind of world that we're creating as women. Like, what do you wish for this new world?
I think just one that supports women in all stages, recognizing that people all have value, and that isn't tied to their age, that isn't tied to their productivity, that isn't, tied to those conventional measures of success. And so many women, when they reach kind of their 40s and 50s, feel like they have an added glass ceiling, right? So not only are they now, faced with maybe ageism, but they're also not considered youthful and aren't considered as valuable to society as they once were, which is ridiculous, right? Because how many women do you know who have, created their entire kind of business after the age of 45, right? I can think of 5 people off the top of my head. So I think breaking through the barrier that women are less productive after 40 would something that I would love to see as part of this new world.
I love it. And I love you, Jenn. I love you. We'll have to have you back because you're just so well-spoken and knowledgeable and passionate, and really everything we look for in like bringing more expertise into our SheQuest community and beyond. I want to thank you so much for your time and being here and your presence, which is just so lovely. So lovely. I'm so glad we connected.
I've loved this. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy. Where can we find you, and how can we support the beautiful world, the beautiful work that you're putting out in the world?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, which is jennsalibhuber.ca, and on social media, most active on Instagram at menopause.nutritionist.
Again, Jenn, thank you so much for being here. Take good care.
Thank you. You too.
This podcast was produced by Tosh Taylor of the Podcast Hub Productions. Find her online at podcasthub.ca.